Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I'm comparing the Nike Metcon 7 to the Nike Metcon 8. As always, everything is timestamped down below, so please jump around accordingly and then get out of this video and go train. But let's dive into our first section. So while there are a lot of similarities between the Metcon 7 and Metcon 8, there are also a few key construction differences. These are models built on years where the 8 was only going to receive a couple of small updates compared to like reworking the full shoe, which we'll likely see in the Nike Metcon 9. The first difference to note between these shoes is number one, their upper construction. So this is the feature that I think could sway folks from the 7 or 8 depending on what you want, and it's arguably the biggest update to the 8. So in the Nike Metcon 8, we now have a mesh upper with textured and synthetic overlays. On the lateral and medial side, we have a different patterning, and then on the midfoot of the lateral side, we have a synthetic overlay, and then a pretty standard boot construction back here built with mesh. On the Nike Metcon 7, we had a chain link mesh upper with synthetic overlays up here in the toe box, a rope guard here on the midfoot, and then again, more of like a traditional boot construction. In the Metcon 7, if there were any issues you were going to run into with the upper durability, it was going to be around the toe box. And so this upper actually stretches a little bit more and breaks in, I think, a little bit better than this material over here in the 8. So I do think the 8 actually has a slight edge for durability just because it feels like it locks you down a little bit more and it feels a bit more secure on the sole of the shoe. So I do think that's a positive update with this model, and the appearance I think is pretty slick, sans the Metcon branding here on the medial side of the shoe. The second major difference to note about these models is the removal of the rope guard. So in the Nike Metcon 7, we had a medial rope guard that wrapped up the medial side of the shoe. Honestly, this construction feature I thought was pretty polarizing in nature. Some folks loved it, some folks despised it. If you were somebody who did not like that feature on the 7, you will like that they removed that on the 8. Now you just have a mesh and synthetic overlay over here on the medial side. You do not have that rubber overlay anymore on the Nike Metcon 8. Now, does that impact the performance or durability of the shoe for rope climbing? I have not seen any issues with that yet, so that could be a good thing if you did not like the rope guard. The third difference to note about these models is the lacing system. So in the Nike Metcon 7, we had 5 eyelets that wrapped up, an internal loop lacing here on the medial side, and then we had flywire here on the lateral 3 middle eyelets. This is pretty different than the traditional lacing system now used in the Nike Metcon 8. This model features your more traditional lacing system. There are 5 core eyelets that wrap up, and overall, neither is better or worse than the other in my opinion. Now, I do have a gripe with how long the laces are in the 8, but when it comes to just locking down the foot and providing you with enough security, I think both of these midfoots do a pretty good job. The fourth difference to note between these models is the lace lock system. So in the Nike Metcon 7, this was the first Metcon training shoe where we had the lace lock used in this model. We had the lace lock up here on the top and the bottom. So you had a Velcro down here in the bottom that served as a loop for the laces, and then you had one here towards the top. This allowed you to put the lace lock either down or up depending on your preferences. In the Metcon 8, we only have a lace lock that comes up. So we no longer have a loop down here on the bottom of the tongue or a Velcro portion, and we have a lace lock up here at the top. What's funny is that with these short laces in the Nike Metcon 8, I've had to use the lace lock a ton in the shoe because the laces are just so short, and with this traditional lacing system, I do think lace security could be an issue despite the midfoot being pretty locked down, whereas in the 7, I never really used that feature. So that is interesting with the 8. Honestly, like, I might actually switch out my laces in the 8 with the laces in the 7 to see if that helps with some of the lacing issues, but those are the biggest construction differences between these models that I think could sway you towards picking one model over the other. All right, so now let's cover some of the performance differences between the Metcon 7 and Metcon 8. Now, I mentioned in my construction section, there are a lot of similarities between these shoes. These similarities revolve around the stack height, midsole, and outsole constructions of these models. So when it comes to stability and versatility in the gym, there is going to be a lot of overlap and carryover between these shoes. However, there are a couple of subtle nuances between these models that I think could sway you towards one model or the other. Now let's answer the question, which model is better for lifting? So if you are looking into the Metcon 7 or Metcon 8 for more recreational lifting, so just going to the gym, doing some barbell work, doing some strength work, honestly, I don't think you could really go wrong with either of these models. So in the 7, you have a similar level of stability as the 8. So when it comes to heavier lifts, both of these models perform very similarly, and I'm not too worried about the upper durability in these models for that context. So if you can find the 7 on sale, for example, I would say rip the 7, especially if you're only going to be using them for lifting. Now, which model is better for CrossFit? And this is where it's a little bit interesting because If you weren't a fan of the rope guard in the 7, or if you ran into durability issues with the upper in the 7, I would say actually go with the 8. And I think that's an area and a nuance where the 8 does have an edge. I do think this upper seems a bit more durable long term compared to this chain link mesh, and without that rubber rope guard. And if folks had an issue with like steaming up or feeling heavy, etc. during their workouts for CrossFit specifically, I could see them actually enjoying the 8 a little bit more. Both models I think do a pretty good job for most CrossFit workouts. However, that heel construction is a little bit annoying in both models, especially if you are doing any WODs with running or a lot of jumping. But across the board, both of these shoes should work pretty well. However, I do think the 8 might have a slight edge for durability due to this reworked upper. Now to answer the question, which model is better for versatile training? So both of these shoes are pretty similar in this context. Now, I like the 7 for versatile training because if you do need a little bit more room in the upper, I do think this upper does break in a little bit better. It gives you a little bit more wiggle room in regard to its flexibility. However, I'd like the 8 because if you like a lower profile upper and you want to feel really locked down in your shoes, I do think the upper and the forefoot of the 8 could do a little bit better there. And when it comes to like lateral work, this upper does seem a little bit better in regard to really locking that foot down. Now, my gripe with the 8 with versatile training is the short laces once again. If you have a high arch or a thicker foot, I could see this lacing system being pretty annoying because for some of my workouts, I don't like cranking my laces super tight. So in the context of versatile training, where you are going to be doing a lot more jumping and stuff, if you're not tightening this shoe a ton and really getting a good lock on the laces when it comes to like double knotting them and then putting in the lace lock, I could see the laces coming undone for you. So that's a knock against this model for versatile training. However, across the board, both of these shoes are just okay for versatile training. They're not necessarily my favorite just because of the heel construction. All right, so now let's dive into the question of which model is better for running. And that's where I'm going to say neither model is good for running. Both models feel very similar. The heel construction is the main knock against these models for running. And so if you are somebody who has a heel strike or a midfoot strike that is a bit more biased towards the heel, this is gonna be an issue for you because this model is gonna feel really uncomfortable. Now, if you're doing WODs with short interval runs, you could probably get away with the shoe. I would say just be very adamant on adapting a forefoot strike. And if you wanna use these models for sprints, they will also work because you're primarily gonna be on the forefoot when doing that. However, slowing down and braking in these models can be a pain on concrete. So I would say save your sprint work for either grass or turf if you plan on using either of these models for sprints. Now to answer the question, which model is better for daily wear? And similar to running, I would say neither of these models is really great for daily wear. These are not going to be the training shoes that you can rock out and about on a daily wear basis for longer walks and then wear to the gym. Because this heel construction lacks flexibility, it can be pretty annoying for walking, and I think you'll get more out of these shoes if you just save them for the gym durability wise. But overall, the performance of these shoes is very similar, especially for more recreational training. As you get more niche with things like CrossFit, that is where I think the 8 might have a slight edge due to the upper durability, but overall, these models are very similar across the board. So when it comes to sizing and fit differences in these models, you can expect similar sizing for the most part. Now, there are a couple of differences between these shoes. So if you have a narrow or neutral width foot, go true to size in these models. If you have a wider foot, you might want to size up a half size, but again, like with most Nike Metcon reviews, I recommend not doing that just because with this low profile boot, you can run into heel slip issues if you have too much wiggle room at the end of your toe box. So for wide feet, you may want to just steer clear entirely of these models. Now, if you have a narrow or neutral width foot and you plan on investing in one of these shoes, the 7 gives you a little bit more upper volume, especially through the forefoot and midfoot. So if you do use like thinner or slightly thicker custom orthotics or inserts, the 7 might be the play in that context. Whereas in the 8, you do have a slightly lower profile construction from this forefoot transitioning into the midfoot. So this model does feel a little tighter through that area, not to a huge degree. However, that is one tiny subtle difference between the sizing and fit of these shoes. However, when it comes to length, they are pretty much the same. The 8 runs a smidge longer, but not enough to warrant adjusting your sizing. And then when it comes to width, both models are also similar. So when chatting on the price of the Metcon 7 and Metcon 8, you can expect to pay $130 USD for both of the core models. Now, with the 8 being so similar to the 7, I think if you did enjoy the 7, I would say just look for 7s on sale. The 8s will be out for a while, plus you can't beat a good deal, especially if you already like that shoe. But if you do want to try the 8, especially for CrossFit, I do think it could be a worthwhile investment, especially for my 7 fans out there. Now, conversely, if you did not like the 7 and the overall construction and performance of this shoe, I would say equally pass on the 8 because that price point would be a miss since it is so similar in regard to its fit, feel, and performance. So when it comes to the weight, heel to toe drop, and insole in the Metcon 8 and Metcon 7, for my size 10 Metcon 8 model here, we have a weight of 12.35 ounces. In the Metcon 7 for my size 10 model, we have a weight of 12.40 ounces. I found that really interesting because this rubber rope guard was regarded as heavy for some folks in regard to features, but these shoes weigh virtually the same. Both models feature a 4mm heel to toe drop, and both models have thin foam removable insoles. All right, so now let's go over the construction of the Nike Metcon 7 and the Nike Metcon 8. Up here on the toe box, we have an extended outsole layer that wraps up on both of these shoes. It is slightly biased towards the medial side, which I personally like. Looking at the upper constructions, we have a chain link mesh upper here in the 7 with the synthetic overlay over the toe box. In the 8, we have a mesh upper with a textured and synthetic overlay. These do vary a little bit on the medial and lateral side, so they are slightly different textures here. Looking at the midfoot constructions, both models feature 5 core eyelets, but once again, in the 7, we had flywire here on the lateral side and an internal lacing system here on the medial side. Looking at the 8, we have a traditional lacing system that wraps up, 5 core eyelets once again. Looking at the tongue constructions, both tongues are padded and they're built with like a breathable mesh. We do have the lace lock here on the lower part and upper part of the Metcon 7's tongue, whereas in the 8, we only have the lace lock up here at the top. Honestly, I've had to use a lace lock in the 8 way more than I've used it in the 7, but that's just my preference. But in the 8, I do feel like you kind of need to use it due to the lacing system. Looking at the midfoot constructions, both models feature this rubber outsole wrap that comes up the side of the shoes. It is pretty much the exact same on both models. However, on the midfoot, on the medial side here, we do have the rubber rope guard on the 7 once again. That has been removed on the 8. Looking at the boot constructions, they are very similar in nature. They both have a little bit of padding here on the internal side, and they have a little bit of structure to them. The heel constructions are also very similar with that Nike React foam midsole here with the TPU clip, and then also that Hyperlift insert. This is the exact same flow as the 7's heel. So when it comes to the Hyperlift insert in the heel of these shoes and the overall midsole flow, they are exactly the same. Both models feature Nike React foam through the forefoot and the entirety of the soles. This gives both models forefoot a little bit more maneuverability. Looking at the outsole constructions, both models feature a similar tread patterning. So up here on the forefoot in both models, you have these flex grooves. This gives the toe box a bit more maneuverability in the shoe. And then you also have a similar midfoot outsole construction where this texture is slightly different to give you more traction for rope climbs. Looking at the heel, you have that cutout once again for that Hyperlift insert. This has like that weightlifting shoe look and feel to it. And then once again, these models both have foam removable insoles, which we just talked about in the previous section. But if you have additional questions on either of these models and their construction, drop a comment down below. All right, guys, that wraps up my comparison of the Nike Metcon 7 and Nike Metcon 8. There are a lot of similarities between these shoes. However, there are also a couple of subtle, interesting differences between these shoes when it comes to their construction and performance. If you have additional questions or questions on which model you should go with, hit me in the comments below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, guys, drop a like on the video, drop subscribe to the channel. I will see you in the next one.